Right now, big businesses are facing a huge challenge to stay relevant. Whilst for startups and scale-ups, establishing credibility is an equally big problem. Each has their own strengths to leverage, but there's somewhat of a race to make sure that one is not outfoxed by the other. You could describe it as a battle of sort, or if you really want to dial it up a bit, a war. But in all seriousness, behind all of this, it's being driven by technology companies and the way that they market and communicate to stakeholders. Tech companies, in this sense, have an advantage because there's pressure on non-tech companies to communicate in a similar manner, because that's what stakeholders are now getting accustomed to. So whether you are on the side of a large established business or that of a disruptor, regardless of your industry, having a solid appreciation and understanding of the value of your innovation when it comes to your unique stakeholders will give you a crucial strategic advantage over your competitors. Joining me on the 414 this week is Matt Cross, who has been closely involved in the evolution of tech comms for the past 15 years, and now as head of B2B for EMEA at Hotwire, he has a first-class understanding and command of the challenges faced by both sides, along with how to leverage existing strengths and address weaknesses in our rapidly evolving technology-enabled world. Good morning. My name's James Rostance and welcome to the 414 Live, here on LinkedIn Live each and every Thursday, today at 11:30 a.m. Wow. This morning, we're going to be talking about how technology companies have led disruption across all industries. And it's quite an in-depth topic, and I've got an awesome guest on the way to be giving more detail on this. But indeed, this is the 414. It's for you as a professional B2B marketer, whether you're in-house at a company or agency side, or indeed you're a B2B business owner who likes to have a hands-on hold on your company's sales and marketing. So, joining me live this morning from Shoreditch in London, sunny Shoreditch this morning, please welcome Mr. Matt Cross. Matt, good morning.
Good morning, James. Thanks for having me. How are you?
Really good. I've been looking forward to this because, we've had a few chats now before doing the show here this morning. And I'm really liking what you're here to talk about, which is how technology companies really have driven a change between established industries and are paving the way for communications to be done properly. I think that's an ambiguous sort of introduction, but as a professional on this subject, could you explain in detail what's driving the change with the way that companies you see should be and is the best way to be communicating with their stakeholders, customers, and indeed employees and VCs?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing that's driving this change is just the rapid pace of evolution of technology. I'm not surprising anybody by saying technology has changed the way that we live fundamentally and changed the way that we work fundamentally. But that rapid adoption of technology has led to a huge change in the way that all businesses start to communicate about themselves. So we have really seen a big shift from just doing communications and marketing for technology companies themselves and talking about products and benefits and things like that, to working with businesses who have their own technology story to tell and their own innovation story to tell. And the reason why that is important is because the value of the communications around innovation and around technology can have a real impact for businesses. So everybody's trying to take advantage of it. You don't just have to be a technology vendor anymore, but maybe you're a traditional business which has an interesting innovation story to tell. And the reason why that's pushed along, as you just pointed out, because it means such a great deal to those different audiences. So businesses who are trying to raise money, businesses who are trying to recruit the best talent, businesses who are trying to prove their future value with the markets. So we've seen this real shift from just technology companies communicating about tech to a much wider group of businesses communicating to a huge range of stakeholders. And in part, this is because of the disruption that has come to a number of different industries over the years.
So what are the industries that would you say are being the most affected by this change?
Well, it's interesting because many industries have already been hugely disrupted by tech. So, for instance, the retail industry, you only have to look online at various articles around the death of the high street to see the impact that e-commerce has had. So the retail industry has fundamentally changed over the last 10 years because of the impact of technology. Also, publishing. So you're a great example. Social media has completely changed the way that the publishing industry works. It's now a battle for eyeballs, and it's driven by advertising. The publishing industry 10 years ago was torn apart, and now they're still trying to work out the best ways of making money. We've seen people putting paywalls up, people charging for content. Some content is free but driven by advertising. So technology in the publishing industry has really fundamentally changed it. Even industries like the legal industry, which is undergoing a big change at the moment. You've got tech like blockchain, which is changing the way that contracts are written and the requirement for solicitors and lawyers in some cases. But also technologies like AI, which are able to very quickly analyze huge data sets in a way which perhaps was done manually by lawyers in the past. So those are industries which have already undergone quite a big change. But what we're seeing is that there's a set of industries which are possibly the slower to change industries. They are very big, they're rooted in traditional sectors, and this is things like healthcare, so widespread healthcare systems and sectors, and automotive. Some really interesting automotive examples that I want to talk to you about as well. The industrial industry, so people who are making huge industrial machines, for instance, or manufacturing and supply chains, and then even the energy industry as well. And the thing about these sectors that I was just describing is that they are so deeply rooted in society that they have a huge social reach. Any changes will have a huge social impact. And when you have industries which are going to have a huge social impact like that, then they're also very, very affected and impacted by policies as well. So from a public sector perspective, when you have to think about the way that the energy industry is regulated, for instance, or that the healthcare industry is regulated. So they have some really interesting challenges as they're becoming disrupted by technology, and that also impacts how they need to communicate in the future.
So how do you set about categorizing those businesses in that case?
Yeah, I think there's two relatively simple ways to do that. One is thinking about this concept of the disruption coin, and both sides of the disruption coin. And on one side, as you pointed out, you've got the disrupted, which is some of those industries that I was just talking about. And on the other side, you've got the disruptors. And the way in which those two sides of that coin communicate to the value of their audiences does change and should change quite drastically. The other way of thinking about it, rather than having a sort of a them and us, is thinking more about an overall journey that those businesses are taking. So on the one side, you've got startups, maybe they're moving through to scale-ups and then on to becoming bigger multinational organizations. So thinking about where businesses are on that journey, and there's usually some kind of inflection point at midway on that journey, some kind of exit. So that might be an IPO, or it might be a trade sale, or a merger or an acquisition of some sort. And so depending on which side of the coin you're on or where you're at on that journey will really determine the types of challenges that you faced as a business as well, and therefore how you communicate and also how you actually need to act as a business. So those are the ways in which we would begin to categorize it.
Okay, so when it comes to actually designing what you're wanting to communicate, what are the communication challenges for the disruptors in that case?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, there are a lot of different challenges. I think probably the biggest one for businesses who are maybe on their way to an exit is just the sheer noise in the market. You've got everything from two people startups right up to Series E funded pre-IPO scale-ups. There are literally thousands of businesses all competing for mind share, competing for awareness with a relatively small group of stakeholders. So when you've got everyone competing in this way, you can see that the sheer noise and the success of some of those companies, is widely known that startups most often will fail. And when a startup fails, there's a very small but tangible impact on the overall reputation of an industry as well. So let's say you're an auto technology provider. Maybe you're making a platform for autonomous vehicles in the future. You're thinking about, how do I raise more money? So in 2019, there was something in the region of $8 to $10 billion of investment just into the auto tech sector. So you're competing for VC share of voice. You've also got to be thinking that actually in the auto tech sector, there's not that many real world rollouts of technology. Some of those technologies are not going to be relevant until maybe 10 years time when autonomous vehicles driving around. But they still need to start thinking about, who are our customers? Which are the customers I need to be communicating with? How can I start to build out advocacy programs? Who's going to stand up next to me as an organization? And so for every company that failed, how can I show that I'm going to be the one that succeeds? And the last thing for those auto tech companies and healthcare and others is from a policy perspective. So how do I really influence policymakers on policies which maybe haven't even been created yet? And how do I start to build networks and build influence with the public sector stakeholder groups? One of the services that we provide to clients is really around that network building. And for the automotive sector, we created something called the Future of Mobility community. And that really is about getting disruptors and the disrupted around the table, an opportunity to network, to learn from each other, and to help them build credibility one-to-one, not necessarily using the media as a channel. So that problem that they're facing, the challenge that they're facing, really comes down, for me, it's a credibility issue. And therefore, that's something we really need to focus on.
So with that then, what are the solutions for them to mitigate against that? What do you prescribe?
Yeah, well, it's when you strip it all back, you really have to build a compelling narrative for yourself. You've really got to be thinking, how can I make myself the most compelling business for those different audiences we talked about? So whether that is the VC community, how do I show that the VCs, they want a return in 5 years. They don't want to hang around for 15 years to get a return. So how do I show that my business model and my organization is going to be compelling for VCs? How do I begin to get into the head of my customers? A lot of these industries, so healthcare is a great example. Healthcare, quite rightly, doesn't necessarily buy technology that readily. It has to be proven. We don't want to put technology into the field where there's, we're thinking about patient outcomes and people's lives. It needs to be proven. But you need to start getting some of those real world examples going. So building out customer advocacy programs, getting inside the heads of our customers and showing that we have compelling proof that our technology works. And I think probably lastly, just thinking about those policy stakeholders, because there's so many different voices out there, so much noise going on. How do you stand out with policymakers, and how do you stand out with those public sector stakeholders to show that your argument and your business is the one that they should be listening to when creating the policies of the future?
That's a tough mission.
It is. So, yeah.
Well, in that case, so that's one side. What about in that case the communication challenges for the disrupted, the established big boys, market leaders, and
and I think I think this is so fascinating. It really is, because a lot of these sectors, big businesses, they're being labelled as dinosaurs, to be honest. They're legacy businesses, and all of that has a tangible impact on the future legitimacy of their business model. It really is the future of their businesses that are at stake. It doesn't take much for investor confidence to be shaken. So if you're a large business and you're listed on the stock exchange and shareholders are constantly monitoring, the market's constantly monitoring your communications, it doesn't take much for them to be shaken. And it's not necessarily just about the actions you take as a big traditional business, but you have to remember it's the actions that those disruptors are taking as well. And that really can have a huge impact on your share price, and therefore how much money you've got to play with in terms of investment. But one of the other things that people don't necessarily think about is how that affects your ability to do things like recruit. So if you're a big traditional business, there is a constant war on talent all around the world, whether it's for developers or marketing talent or what have you. But if you think you're a graduate coming out of university and you're faced with the prospect of working for a dinosaur or legacy business, or working for an exciting startup who might give you options and make some money out of an IPO, I think there's obviously a challenge there in making sure that you can, as a big business and traditional business, you can recruit the best talent that comes through. So there's a lot that they need to think about, and again, it comes down to how you act and the types of communications that you're doing as a large business.
That's quite possibly the least attractive marketing spin you could put on a business. Come work for us. We're a dinosaur in our industry.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. So, well, it would only be fair then, in that case, to ask what, in that case, are the solutions for the disrupted to deal with those communication challenges? What do you prescribe?
Yeah, and I think part of this comes down to how you communicate your innovation. Over the last 5 years, there's been a lot of businesses going out and creating labs. They'll create an innovation lab, and they've created it because it feels like, oh, we should be, we're innovative, we should be going out and we'll start a lab and see what happens. But it's very transparent, unfortunately, and I don't think there's that many businesses who are going out and doing that anymore. It needs to be much more credible. So if you have, lots of these businesses do have really interesting and credible innovation stories, and so it's about discovering those, really understanding how you can make those work in terms of your stakeholder communications, but making sure they're authentic. It is about actions and not words. Don't talk about plans for innovation. Everybody can talk about plans for innovation and what could happen in the future, but really it needs to be about what action is happening today. And I think the other thing for big businesses is being realistic as well. Recognize that there are risks involved. You see a lot of the big banks actually doing this quite well. They recognize there are big risks involved in the future in terms of the technology that they have today and what they can do on their own. So they're teaming up with the disruptors, they're teaming up with startups and scale-ups in an authentic way, not just plowing money into them, although some of them are, but in an authentic way to co-create, collaborate on technology and innovation. And that is just showing that you recognize that there is a risk and that we're taking action to doing something about it. The worst examples are when you have CEOs who are talking about a vision which just won't become a reality because of the amount of technology innovation that's going on. And as soon as you start to lose that sort of legitimacy, then you start to lose that credibility as well. But I think for big businesses, it's just trying to show that they're relevant, and what we work with businesses in order to effectively get them back at the front of the pack. Lots of these industries are very used to, they were the first to create something and they were the first to provide this sort of service, and now they feel like they're dropping back. But through proper communications, you can really position yourself at the front of the pack, both for investors and shareholders, but also for employees as well.
Nice. It's all there for the taking is the kind of, what's the word? the overall message that I'm getting from this, both for the disruptors and the disrupted. I do have a question.
I would say that because I'm an optimistic PR person, so
it's the best way to be. Absolutely. Brittany Akins would like to put a question to you. She asks, by the way, how should businesses deal with purpose? Yeah,
I mean, it's really interesting. I think 2020 is going to be, it's the year of responsibility, and quite right. Mm-hmm. I think we've seen a huge rise in the way that success is being measured, and it shouldn't just be profits anymore, but it should be other factors as well. So we're seeing this rise in ESG, environmental standards, sustainability standards, and governance standards. So that's really, really, really important. And things like the triple bottom line, how businesses are being measured on their overall impact to society, and not just the profits that they're giving back to shareholders. The thing about purpose is it has such an implication for your customers as well, and their perception of you. We actually did some research last year which showed that even in the B2B world, if a supplier feels like they are in a relationship where you're beginning to contradict some of their values, then they will end that relationship, and they'll not just end it over the course of weeks, but they'll take quick action. If they feel like your business doesn't align with their values, they'll start to end that relationship very, very quickly. And it just shows that there's huge implications for the customers. But I think with purpose, it's a massively it's a huge topic, isn't it? And everybody seems to be talking about it. But for me, it comes down to two things. First of all, it's much easier to talk about purpose if you are a smaller business and it's baked in from the start, like it's a genuine part of your business. For instance, if you're a B corporation, which is a corporation for benefit, it means that you have met certain standards and proved that you are giving back from a social perspective. If you can bake it in from the start, then it's much easier. But if you can't, you're a big business and you're out there. It's a fine line between overselling it and underselling it. Like, if your purposefulness will not sell itself, so you do have to go out there and communicate about it, but you also you can't over egg it. And a little bit like what I was talking about before, it's about actions and not words. There's so many promises about what businesses will do and how they'll operate in the future, but it's rubbish unless there are there's real actions beneath it. So I think you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't in some ways as a big business. But if nothing else, just prove with real actions that you're making the right decisions.
Yes, judge people or even businesses on what they do, not what they say, right?
Exactly.
Must admit, I've got a huge bugbear with companies doing a veneer of, we care about this issue, or we really care about this issue, and they don't, because you can tell it's only surface level. So yeah, I can appreciate that's a challenge for big businesses to do that authentically. But from exactly what you're saying there is that if you do commit to it, then your customers will ultimately respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, it'll 100%. It will drive loyalty, and loyalty is a hard thing to create at the moment in terms of brand loyalty. But it is certainly a way. But equally, if you fall on the wrong side of it, customers will leave very quickly. We know that consumers will leave at the drop of a hat if they feel a brand has contravened their overall values. But it's the same in the B2B world. People, businesses cannot afford to be tainted by someone else's poor actions. And if you feel like one of your customers or suppliers, or you are a customer or supplier who hasn't met the standards of your partner organizations, people will start to walk away, and they'll walk away quickly because no one can afford to be tainted by it.
That's the point, actually. Yes, it's not just about two businesses being aligned. So if one is a bad egg, you don't want to be aligned with that as a business. But then, as we keep covering on the show, is that B2B buyers are real people as well. So if they don't like what you're about, or you're going against their values, there's a very good chance that they will get rid of you and go with a company that has got their moral compass and everything else lined up, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just because often it is because of the buyer themselves. They have their own moral code and their own ethical code, which is right. But equally, they are being judged by external regulators, so their customers and their partners. Why are you doing business with that organisation which has just been dragged through the press for doing X, Y, and Z? So everybody has a responsibility, and it is about time this happened. So it's positive. But communications teams and marketing teams really need to think deeply about which side, where they fall, and what proactive steps they can take and what reactive steps they should take if a crisis of some sort does happen.
Yes, which seems to happen more these days than not, right?
Doesn't it? Everyday crisis.
Brittany would like to pose another question, actually. She asks, what other trends should businesses be keeping an eye out for in 2020? That's good.
Yeah, I think it probably comes back to those things that we were talking about a second ago about the ways in which businesses are being measured. Don't just think, particularly for larger businesses, don't just think about your 90-day cycle, as in the next time you're going to be talking about your earnings. You need to be thinking beyond that. All of our clients are, we push clients to really think beyond the 90-day cycle, beyond the next 6 months, beyond the next year, working out how as a business we communicate our value, our roadmap and our vision. And I think when you start to look at measures outside of profits, which is traditionally what CEOs have to report back on every 90 days, then you do have to start taking a longer term view, because social responsibility, for instance, that doesn't happen in 90 days. You can't make a big change in 90 days, so it has to be a longer view. So I think it's that trend of really taking a much longer view, being able to encapsulate your long-term vision about and then how that links up to things like purposefulness or things like the rise of responsibility.
With you. And follow on to that. So, what are the B2B companies? What are the trends B2B companies need to keep their finger on the pulse of too?
In terms of communications, and
I fluffed the posing of that question. I was trying to look at you and read the question at the same time. Right, let me try one more time. So, she asked, would love to know what other trends B2B companies need to keep their finger on the pulse of too. There we go. So, yes. So what other trends should B2B companies be looking at keeping on top of?
Yeah, I think I think just thinking about where you are on your journey. I mean, there's these macro trends like purpose and all that sort of stuff, which may or may not have an impact on your business. But for me, you've got to take it back and make it much more relevant to your business. So really thinking about where you are on that journey, and what are some of the specific things you need to account for in terms of the audiences that you're reaching out to on that journey. So bringing it back to whether perhaps it's a credibility thing for smaller businesses, or whether actually you're driving more relevance for bigger businesses. Those I wouldn't necessarily be thinking about the macro trends necessarily. I would also be thinking about where you're at on your journey, and then therefore what that means in terms of your stakeholder communications.
Nice. Well, I guess in closing then, what would you like the core takeaway to be for viewers and listeners on this whole subject?
Yeah, I mean, I think the takeaways are that the value of technology communications doesn't have to just be about a product or a benefit, and it shouldn't be. It should be much wider than that. You should really be thinking about the bigger story at play. We talked about how you make yourself really compelling to those specific audiences, and the challenges that you're facing as a business on the lead up maybe to an exit, and also the challenges that you face as a business who is trying to drive more relevance. Just thinking about how you get back to the front of the pack it can't be about the product and service that you provide. You must be thinking more widely, and where you are on that journey should really determine how you act and how you behave. So I really want people to think, beyond the product and beyond the service, and really get to grips with where they are on that journey in terms of their communications with stakeholders.
Perfect. Well, Matt, thank you ever so much for joining us on the show today. That was we went into a lot of detail there, and I'm really happy with the way that went. In short, so thank you very much. Nice.
Thank you very much.
Well, if you've enjoyed watching, then please do head to the414.net to subscribe for all future episodes. If you do that, head to the414.net. You will be able to enter your email address so that you get a notification about 5 minutes before we go live on a Thursday. And within the email, you'll also get the link then to catch the replay if, for whatever reason, you've been doing something and you didn't catch the live version of the show. There we go. So this has been the 414, insights and wisdom from some of the greatest and most interesting minds in B2B marketing. We do this here every week. My name's James Rostance. Thank you very much for watching.